Okay, let's see. It is January 14th, 2024. And I want to do a test run of telling my story in a way that people can understand. I know that people get bits and parts and they don't understand. Anyway, so I'm going to run through the questions that I'm going to hopefully be talking to people about from their point of view. Okay. So what city and state did court proceedings occur in this matter? The city and state were Monterey County. Well, it was Monterey County in Monterey, California. What year and month were actions initiated to conserve your family member? The initial proceedings began in July of 2012. Okay. What date was the family member officially conserved? I believe she was conserved officially of the person and the estate. The emergency one, she was basically conserved around March 25th, or no, before that, March 4th, no, sometime in March. I have to get that date. Okay. What triggered actions leading towards conservatorship? So this is the question. So the actions that led to my mother being conserved were a series of complaints by a neighbor, one neighbor, Melanie Rogers. Melanie Rogers informed Adult Protective Services, who were friends of hers because she was a DA investigator, and so she knew everybody at the DA's office. She also knew the public guardian, Jennifer and Passes, about the worst public guardian. Can never work for another government county entity again because of the actions in my case. But nothing was ever investigated as far as making reparations to my mother. So my mother had been gone to Peru for 6 months visiting her family. Last thing she said when she walked out the door was, buy this house, because it was in a short sale and she wanted to buy another property. I said, okay, that's what I will work on. I had all the powers of attorney over the finances. I'm an only child. It was just me and my mom. I did have a boyfriend who was living with us for a couple years. And in fact, the last couple of years, we were completely supporting him. Kevin Gould, a Canadian citizen here, has a green card, was married, divorced, and basically his wife got taken to the cleaners, and she said he'd do the same to me. And she was right. Anyway, so she comes back from holiday, and I believe on June 24th, and I believe by July 7th or something, a knock came at the door, and a Mr. Mudd of Adult Protective Services, I found his name very appropriate, came in and started accusing me of locking, that they received complaints from a neighbor that I'd been locking my mother in a room for 6 months and nobody had seen her, and I'd been feeding her under the door. I said, excuse me, Mommy, can you come here, please? Could you bring your passport? So she did, and she brought her passport, and we both looked at him, and he didn't know what to do. He was, and I go, so is there anything else? Because no, my mother's not been locked in a closet or a room or anything like that. She's been traveling. I just went to San Francisco to pick her up. My mother has complete freedom of movement, always. We both kind of laughed about it. He made a phone call, and then he started asking other questions. Well, what about the finances? What about this? What about that? And reading a rap sheet, somebody else's. Oh, you have 4 burglaries and 5 DUIs. I said, you're wrong. You're mistaken. I do not have any of those things. You are reading somebody else's rap sheet. I'm sorry to tell you this, but you are. But he just kept going and going. And finally, I said, could you please get the hell out? But he would be back. when he left the house, he didn't even hide where he was going. He didn't even walk out to the sidewalk. He just jumped over the fence between us and the neighbors. So he was reporting to Melanie Rogers. Melanie Rogers, who initiated the complaint that I'd been locking my mother in a room for 6 months, who knew very well exactly where my mother was. She knew my mother was on vacation. But she made up this story that was a lie to get some sort of investigation started. And she was in charge of the investigation. So anything that wasn't about me, she was making, deeming it private or secure, or taking it out of the file. So he kept coming back, Mr. Bud, check on my mom. My mom was like, I don't want to see that man anymore. And then he said, look, we just want you to sign your money over to a fiduciary. That's it. It'll be the same. And Wells Fargo will give you back the $10,000 they charged in fees for lack of funds. Or not lack of funds, but because I couldn't deposit money. She was gone. I was handling the rental and taking all the income, and I was putting it in the bank. And that didn't look bad. So they wanted it to look bad. So Wells Fargo stopped taking deposits. I couldn't deposit cash. I couldn't deposit checks. I couldn't deposit rent checks from the San Francisco property. And Melanie Rogers' brother, Mark Rogers, is a Bank of America executive in Palo Alto. We were in Monterey. So I don't even have to wonder how that all happened. For a bank not to take deposits. Not limit withdrawals, just deposits. So at that time I also discovered, right before my mother came home, a month before, I discovered that Kevin Gould had been taking the cards and taking out lots of money and bought himself new camera equipment and I think a new accordion. And there was some irregular charges, and there was one day I wanted to go to the store, and I went into my wallet and all the credit cards were gone, and I figured he didn't think I was going to go out, so he took them, and I figured it out finally. And when he came back, he was very nervous because I started to ask him questions about that. So subsequently he disappeared at one point, but he was left in such a state that he forgot his mobile phone. And on that mobile phone were all his text messages between his sister, Melanie Rogers, Drew Rogers, Mark Rogers, and pictures. Anyway, so I made a report against Kevin about the money. Melanie Rogers turned around the report to make it me. So at one point, after they told my mom, they figured out, okay, she's not being locked in a closet, she was traveling, okay, what about the stolen money? And I told her what Kevin had done, I told her before, and that I'd done these police reports, and that they turned it right around to trying to do something to me. And I was like, hey, and I wanted copies of the police reports. They wouldn't give them to me because they said I wasn't the primary person that the reports were made on the behalf of. I had power of attorney over everything for financial for my mother and I. So I was completely in line to make that report and to have access to it. But she didn't want it to because she didn't want Kevin Gould to be implicated, because somehow her and Kevin Gould, who was my boyfriend for 3 years, were connected. And that became very obvious when we moved to Pacific Grove, next door to Melanie Rogers and Jan Crowley, her girlfriend. Kevin would talk about them oh, everybody was so relieved when, Melanie got this girlfriend because Melanie's just been so difficult and this. And I'm like, how do you know so much about them? We just met them 2 days ago. Oh, they were talking to me by the fence. And I thought it sounded odd, but I guess everything out of Kevin's mouth was a lie, and so it didn't do much to pursue down the rabbit hole. So I just kind of accepted it, thought it was odd. Didn't think it was anything that was being done to harm me or my mom. Then I would have done something much faster, but I just didn't think like that. So, he's like always, I go outside and he's whispering with Melanie Rogers and all this little secrecy stuff. And he meets her brother, Drew Rogers, and they're going to go do photo shoots together. I say, great, have fun. And I've never met Drew Rogers. Well, Drew Rogers was definitely trying to break us up and definitely part of this plot, because we have an email exchange or text message exchange that is very telling. And I couldn't understand why Drew Rogers would hate me. I've never met him. It was all getting very confusing, very fast. And then Kevin yelled at me for picking that house, that we should have never moved to that house. And another friend said, Patty, you got to move from that house. Imagine you're Palestine and they're Israel. And I'm like, who is Israel and who is Palestine? And what are you talking about? Because it sounded so crazy. And my friend was Carlos McClatchy, who told me that, to move, to get away from them. They were going to cause me harm. And I said, this is America. What do you mean cause me harm? If we have the money, we can buy this house. But, I didn't know. This whole, deep state, horrible things that go on. And I wish somebody would have sat me down and explained it to me, because it would have saved a lot of time, a lot of years of me trying to figure it all out. Anyway, so my mom's gone for 6 months. Okay, Kevin and I are there at the house. My mom says buy the house because we still had enough money. Switched all her investments to Merrill Lynch. That's another story. We'll talk about that later, because I'm trying to go from the conservatorship forward and then go to the backstory. But I might go off on some tangents. So Mr. Mudd keeps coming by. Mom says, don't answer the door. I want to talk to him. And I'm like, she's not here. He goes, if you don't answer this door right now, I'll get a SWAT team over here and we'll break down the door. And I said, okay, she doesn't want to talk to you. So he comes in, he's talking, he tries to bribe her to put the control of the money in anybody else's hands. She won't do it. She says no. She was of sound mind. She knew what she wanted. And she said, me and my daughter are fine. Leave us alone. But he wouldn't. And then Wells Fargo also was working with them. So my mom wanted to move her money out of Wells Fargo into a different investment. As soon as she tried to do that, they put a freeze on all the accounts. That was in September of 2012. So we had to ask for an allowance for daily expenses. And they had done this, filed for control of the estate, for a conservatorship of the estate. Behind our backs, they have chosen out the attorney that would be appointed to my mother, one of the highest paid attorneys on the Monterey Coast, who was working with the public guardian, not with us, but with the public guardian. My mother wanted to get rid of her from day one, but we couldn't get another lawyer. Our phone, everybody we called, either they were out of business or too full, I don't think our phone calls were really going out, because one time I was talking to somebody and Melanie Rogers' voice broke into the phone call. And the person I was talking to said, Patty, let's get off the phone now. And I said, yeah, that's a good idea. So, you've got tight control of an investigation against me when there's evidence of other people doing a lot of stuff, her own cousin being one of them. And in fact, to get Kevin to leave me so that they could just get me alone, they offered to give him and his ex-wife's house in Saratoga, Florida, that they would allow him to buy it as a short sale for $50,000. He had a $10 deposit. The $10 he borrowed from me because he didn't even have that. After he'd already been stealing a ton of money and all that. And at that time, I never connected Melanie Rogers and John Rogers, my former employer, because Rogers is a common name, until I did background checks on her, and I couldn't find much, but I did it on her brother, and her brother is John Rogers' cousin, so she's got to be John Rogers' cousin too, right? So then things started to make a little bit more sense. So they investigated me for financial wrongdoing in the handling of my family estate, and they couldn't find anything prosecutable. They wanted me to plead guilty to a misdemeanor because I bought a book on healing, stuff like that, like an esoteric book. Is very petty. So they knew that if they went down that line, actually the truth would have come out of who the people who were enacting financial abuse on my family were. And it was, Kevin was aiding them, and John Rogers is involved, and there's a couple of other people, and Tom Balin. And so that's why they didn't go down that line. But they kept the temporary conservatorship. And what it's used for is to put pressure on an elderly person. My mother was doing great until all this was making her so nervous and upset. She went to the bank and they wouldn't give her money, and she was, that's my money, give me my money. They would not. And they laughed at her, and they laughed at me, and they laughed at us. Per the public guardian. Public guardian, Jennifer Impassis, who was the one pushing for this case, was Melanie Rogers' personal friend. My private investigator found out that they belong in a motorcycle club together. So they had a personal relationship. She saw big money, and they were just going to take everything. And, she started liquidating a temporary conservatorship of the estate. She started liquidating funds at an alarming rate. Like, we had wonderful tax portfolio. We had a wonderful stock portfolio. I spent hours and hours and hours with with our representative, picking each one out individually, watching. I met with them quite often, and we were doing really well. So we weren't allowed to know what was going on with the money. We weren't allowed to get another lawyer. I was supposed to get a lawyer on my own to fight against my mother's lawyer because we were against each other. And my mom said, I am not against my daughter, and she's not against me. We are together. So the lawyer never really expressed anything that we said to the judge, or she did what she wanted, Chris Campbell. I think she got paid $350,000, something like that, for nothing. So they didn't get the financial thing because they'd have to expose themselves to be able to get that. Kevin did leave. He left one day, just disappeared. Came back a couple times to break in the door and see who I was with, or I wasn't with anybody. And I always wondered, where did he come from so fast? He came from next door. He was staying at Melanie Rogers' house. Then when he disappeared, he left his phone, and that's where I found out a lot of the information. Then I had kind of had a feeling something wasn't right, but I didn't know the extent it went to, really. And after all these years, now I do. So he was Tom Balin, who faked his death to get his life insurance, and did that with his ex-girlfriend Rosalind Johnson, who's on his paperwork for the police department under domestic partners. Rosalind L. Johnson. I'm sure that she collected the life insurance and helped him do that. He pretended to go. He was on probation in 5 different counties for multiple different incidents of domestic violence, all with me as the victim. All of those happened within 6 or 7 months. I left him, but there was all these court proceedings, and he blamed me, said I made him hit me. He broke into my house 2 or 3 times with knives. One time he cut his own throat because he was going to go for mine, but my dog shocked him, and I was asleep, and I woke up to that. I didn't call the police when he came to my house because he told me he would kill me, and I'm pretty sure he was going to. because I talked to his father and asked his father. Anyway, so Tom is back in California in a different name. He's free now. He's got his life insurance money. He did life insurance fraud. He openly showed himself to me when he would stalk me when I come back to San Francisco. Rosalind L. Johnson was, I believe, his accomplice. And somehow they befriended Kevin and John Rogers. And so here I see pictures of all of them at a hockey game, minus Rosalind. And the tape of the voice after Tom's death is of Kevin and Tom speaking about, laughing about, how they're lying to me and what to show me. And this is after Tom is supposed to be dead. And Kevin thought he was getting in with all these rich people because in the evenings, Kevin liked to drink a lot. So every so often he'd start to say names, and I would just be quiet and let him say it. One name was Big Bird. Big Bird. Everybody else wants to stop, but Big Bird just wants to go on. Okay, Big Bird was Susan Werner. We all called her Big Bird because she looks like Big Bird. And I asked him about that, and he said, oh, he must have been channeling what I was thinking or something. I said, you're channeling the names of my enemies right now. Okay. So anyway, these are the players. These are the actors that were behind, right? The scenes. And they have relatives in law enforcement and banking. And this is what happened to my family. This is what destroyed my family. This is what killed my mother. And you just have to do a check to see if what I'm saying is true. Is Melanie Rogers, Drew Rogers' sister? Drew Rogers is from San Francisco, and now I think he lives near Monterey. Photographer. I don't know really what he was. A pimp? I don't know. Because pictures I saw were all of course. But whatever. Well, Melanie's brother is related to John Rogers, so I would assume Melanie is. And suddenly Kevin, who I dated for 3 years, told him the horror stories I went through with Tom about all the beatings and everything, because there were beatings, very many. And in fact, in Sacramento, they thought that my arm would have to be amputated because they thought that it had gone so far deep, the bruises to my bones. I was like, no, I'm fine, I'm going to be okay. But Carlos McClatchy took me there. I didn't want to go, and I forgot that I wasn't wearing a long sleeve shirt because I hadn't been going out. I'd just been hiding, ashamed, being beat up like that. Yeah. So, and now I'm going back and forth a little bit. Okay. So, the conservatorship proceedings start. We want to contest it. The court investigator's report says, I have it, my mother seems in her right mind and she does not want anybody from the outside at all having anything to do with the money. He says that I sit there with her and I kind of remind her of certain dates and everything. And she does have capacity to vote. She has capacity to know where she is. She has capacity, basically. And the court appointed attorney that was supposed to be on our side, told us, oh, the neighbors are never going to let you buy this house. What do you mean the neighbors? How do they have a say? I thought this was still America, but it's not really. I think everybody's waking up to that fact. And I think they will this year when everything goes crashing down. But due to corrupt people like these people. So,